And we are live. Good morning, everybody. It's Friday. You made it through the week. Congratulations. A little bit dreary in Colorado, but this time of year, we will take it. No snow so far, so can't beat that. My name is Bryan Armentrout, and I'm with the Food Leadership Group, a food safety consulting company based in Colorado, here with my good friend, Hank Hirsch, with two companies. So he's the CEO of Comprehensive Food Safety and RK Environmental Services. How are you doing this morning, Hank?
I'm doing great, Bryan. Thanks for inviting me to be on your podcast. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you bet. One of the traditions we have here on the podcast is we'd love to find out where people are in the world. As I mentioned, I'm in Loveland, Colorado, which is a little north of the Denver metro area, kind of along what they call the Front Range here in Colorado, so kind of snuggled up against the mountains. A lot of times, Hank, people think that Colorado, right? We're all up in the mountains in the cabins and fighting off the bears and stuff like that. But most people are kind of in the metro area at the base of the mountains, and then we head up in the mountains on the weekends and cause big traffic jams. So where are you at?
So I am in Rockland County, New York. It's about 30 miles north of New York City. Grew up on Long Island, and then I was forced to move to Rockland County when I got married 24 years ago. So I've been up here for 24 years. And like I said, we're about 30 miles north of New York City. So 30 miles north of New York City could be about a 2-hour drive, or if you time it right, it could be a 35, 40-minute drive.
Yep, I hear that. And yeah, so a lot of people, of course, I lived in Buffalo, New York for about 6 years. And people always think New York, oh, New York City. Well, no, that's part of the state, but there's a whole lot more out there. And even when you go a little bit north, like toward your direction, Albany, heading up toward, the lakes and things like this, beautiful country up there.
Yeah, it's definitely great. I'm more of a beach guy, so I tend to head south, but been in New York my whole life.
That's kind of funny how that works. I've made that observation too, right? So growing up in the West where there's mountains and I'm used to seeing something on the horizon to look at, moving back east when we live back there, no mountains, it's kind of weird, right? It takes a while to get used to. And so there's mountain people, beach people, right? And we kind of congregate in those two groups. Karina, good morning. Nice to see you. If you're new to the food safety chat, just a brief kind of conversation about what we're doing here. First thing is what you're going to find out is this is completely different from what you normally see for live streams. A lot of times it's webinars and presentations and people going through PowerPoints and all these type of things. This is not that. This is a really unique opportunity to talk with an expert in the field of food safety. And so every week I bring on a new expert and we have a chat around these topics. And so this is a great opportunity to ask experts like Hank questions that have been really bugging you and get it directly from the expert's mouth. Joe's here to bug us. Watch out. Joe Lano is here. He's going to cause trouble, I know already. So Tammy's here. Good morning. Always good to see Tammy. So
yeah, Bryan, if Joe is on, we can expect some softball questions thrown our way. Sure.
Oh, yeah, here's a question from Joe. Hank, why are you so awesome? Can you please explain?
He'll have to figure that one out for himself. He'll have to stay for the whole hour to figure that one out for himself.
So one of the things, too, if you're new to the podcast that we love to do when we start off, because part of this is I always want to jump into the topic right away. But one of the things we love to do, Hank, is we share a ceremonial drink together with everybody. So please join us. Grab your mug, even if it's a New York Jets mug, and join us. Wonderful. What's your beverage of choice in the morning?
Well, that is a double espresso that I put into a mug instead of an espresso cup.
Oh, you don't mess around. That's the high octane stuff. Just some light roast coffee for me here this morning. No cream. Trying to get rid of the cream. So that's always a source of unneeded calories. So one of the topics, and this is what's really kind of cool about this is with Hank's companies, is they're really, really involved with pest control, right? And so you have a unique degree. And so I kind of wanted to poke around with that a little bit more. So your degree is in entomology, correct?
Correct.
Wow. Yeah. How did you even have you just always liked bugs and when you were younger, a kid, or what?
Well, we only have an hour, so I'll just hit the highlight film for you. So I grew up on Long Island. My father had started a very small pest management firm with one of our neighbors who's really, really well known, or was really, really well known in the food industry. as a pest management consultant named Richard Camerling. So
Mhm.
therein lies the RK in our company name.
Oh,
That's named after Richard. And sadly, he passed a little bit less than a year ago. But he was my mentor in the industry. I learned pest management, but specifically in the food industry, from him and my father as I was growing up. And then I had worked for a few other pest management companies. I had my degree, which was not in entomology, but I finally landed a job as a technical director for a pretty large pest management company in New Jersey, and they sent me back to Rutgers for the degree in entomology.
uh-huh.
So at that point, I was really involved and just loving the technical aspect of pest management, and I was just like totally wanted to learn more and more about entomology. So it was just like real interesting time of my life and my development to be able to work for a regional pest management company as a technical guy, and then for them also to send me back to Rutgers to study entomology. And Bryan, while all the other students were interested in agricultural entomology or veterinary entomology or public health entomology, I was the sole person who was interested in what we've referred to as urban entomology, which is insects that we deal with in the pest management industry, urban pest management.
Interesting. That's really, really cool. So, I mean, so as I was kind of thinking about this too, essentially, I mean, entomology, right? So we're always used to talking about bacteria, right? Salmonella, Listeria, and they have certain ways of doing things, right? In how they provide their niches, how they attack their hosts when they are invading and become pathogenic, right? Essentially, it's the same with entomology, right? So certain type of insects have certain types of behavior, and you need to understand those and know that, okay, if I'm dealing with a weevil, right, and it's attracted to these type of products, flowers and things like this, these are the vectors that those type of things can attack versus a flying insect or whatever, right? So interesting.
Yeah, it all really does. When you're looking at any pest issue at any food facility, you have to understand the insect. And I think when it comes to the food industry, and in particular, what we refer to as stored product insects, like you said, the weevil, right? That's one of the stored product insects. That's a unique understanding of insects that you need to have in order to be able to manage pests at a food facility. And I often suggest to clients and to pest management professionals that I train that they engage in an exercise. I refer to it as a susceptibility audit, right? Which is take the food facility and identify all of the raw materials that go into making the product or products at that facility. After you do that, assign a risk of which pests would be attracted to those foods. So, for example, you said corn and you also said flour.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you said weevil and you said flour.
Yeah.
Weevils don't attack flour. Weevils attack whole grains, right? So when I know that I have a snack food manufacturer that has corn as a primary ingredient in many of their products, I know weevils are a risk for that type of product in that type of facility versus maybe a bakery that does have bulk flour. Now I know that the risk is with flour beetles. So really understanding the product, understanding the insect and what the risk is to certain raw materials, and then understanding how the food facility operates, how all the equipment operates. And the more you understand the nuances of a specific processor, the better you're going to be at designing a pest management program for them.
Huh. So immediately, the first thing that came to my mind when you were going through that, Hank, is it's essentially like when you're going through your food safety plan, right? You're doing a risk assessment. So, okay, here's the things I have. Here's the things that are probably going to want to attack them. How do I mitigate that activity?
100% correct. You're looking at what food materials are in the facility and what the risks are with different pests that could be introduced. How they get introduced. Do they get introduced through bulk deliveries into bins or silos? Do they get introduced, on pallets of bulk bags or super sacks? Or is our facility located in an area maybe close to another food plant or a farm or something that can provide a risk to that plant from the outside. So that all goes into a formalized assessment that would be done. And based on risk, you assign the frequency of that assessment. You're going to do it once a year, you're going to do it twice a year, you're going to do it quarterly, et cetera, based on risk.
That's a good point. Part of it's too. So unlike microbial risk within your plant, which is pretty constant through the year relative to your risk, that's kind of what's unique about pests then too, right? Is that risk is going to vary according to the time of year. So flying insects maybe have high activity in the summer, right? They're not around in the winter. Mm-hmm. So you also need to kind of tackle it from that perspective. So there's an added layer of complexity with pests that you don't have with micro.
No question about it. And that's why, pest management is one of those components of a food safety program. And the level of documentation and the complexity of the documentation has increased over the years to comply with different audit schemes. So it's been, I'm going to say probably about 15 years now that a standard document that is provided during audits would be trend reports, trend analysis and trend reports, which quite honestly, Bryan, are only as good as the data that is inputted into them and the analysis that's done after reviewing those, right? So instead of just checking a box and say, does the facility's pest management program have trend reports? Is somebody actually looking at those trend reports and then making edits to the IPM program accordingly based on what the data is providing? So there's a lot of value in accurate record keeping and analysis of those records.
Yeah, so a good example of that, let's take something kind of obvious, so like rodents. So rodent activity is going to go up if you're in a rural area, and let's say you're by agricultural farms, right? So corn and things like that the rodents are attracted to. And then fall comes and it starts getting colder, right? And those mice are saying, oh crap, I got to get somewhere warm. This isn't very good. And now all of a sudden your activity is going up. So to your point, to kind of reflect that back, is you're seeing these go up on your graph. If you're the quality manager in the plant, you should be looking at that and saying, oh, this isn't good. We need to increase our surveillance activity from, every other week to every week here as we get through the fall, because, there's lots of stuff going on. You have to react.
Well, not only, I think better than reacting, I think that the food industry, since the introduction of the Food Safety Modernization Act, is now more focused on preventive, right, than reactive. So when your trends show you that you have an uptick in rodent activity, come October, November, early December, you should take some preemptive action, right? Maybe it includes putting extra trapping devices outside or making sure that, foliage around the facility is being maintained properly so it's not providing harborage for rodents, or, maybe increasing sanitation efforts outside so you don't have product spillage near dumpsters or compactors and that sort of thing. So, I would focus more on the preventive approach than the reactive approach. And that's, again, the value of the data of some of the reporting.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? In quality control, quality assurance, food safety, we're always trying to move from reactive to preventative, right? And this is a great way to do it. And that's always kind of the problem too, right? Is if you're doing a great job at that, right, and you're keeping those activities from happening, then all of a sudden the plant manager is saying, well, why are we doing this? Nothing's happening anyway. Well, yeah, it's not happening because we prevented it from happening, right? So you have to be able to communicate that to management as well to make sure that those activities are seen.
Totally.
Yeah, because because once it gets to a point where it's, that curve is going up and you have a gigantic problem, right? And we've seen recent issues with this where infestations have gotten completely out of control. Too late, right? It's too late at that point.
Yeah, I think, a few of the good things that have really come out of the increased regulation, in particular with FSMA, also with these, more comprehensive global audit schemes like SQF and BRC, is that, and with more of a social media awareness of what's going on in the culture, there is just less tolerance for pest issues at any food processing facility. And where many food processors in the past may have looked at pest management as this kind of just this service that we have to get versus being an important component of our food safety program, many food processors are now taking pest management much more seriously. They're investing more into pest management programs, whereas in the past they just didn't. And even some of the smaller food processors that always saw pest management as just an expense, they're now being forced to take pest management more seriously as well, because many of them are co-packaging for some of the larger producers. And that kind of forces their hand into compliance with, solid food safety programs. So, I'm not a big regulatory guy, but when it comes to food safety, I sure am. And I think that it's made for, just better standards throughout the food industry and a better acceptance of a solid pest management program.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because part of this too, right, is everything is changing so rapidly. And part of it is, right, these things, right? Most companies I visit now allow cell phones out on the floor. And if you have an employee who has been saying, hey, we got a problem here, I've been seeing stuff, we got a problem in the warehouse, and you don't take care of it, you can end up online a lot faster than you think. And if that happens, it's hard to defend yourself, right? It may not even be accurate. But if somebody's taking a picture or a little video and posting it online and it goes viral, you're going to find out that expense around pest management is money well spent.
And when I do with my training, I often just start off, I just want to kind of grab the audience's attention and be a little profound. And I'll actually share real stories of pest issues at food facilities that dirty laundry has gotten out to the public, and it's impacted that company one way or another, whether it's just loss of product sales or boycotts against the company, regulatory involvement now jumping in to see what's going on at particular facilities. And I do that because I want to drive the point home to the food safety professionals that you can't have pest problems in your facility. It's not okay. You're not going to tolerate foodborne illness in your facility. Why are you going to tolerate having a mouse problem or, an insect problem in your facility, or birds outside of your facility, near dock doors, et cetera? And for the pest management professional, I want to drive that point home too, because pest management professionals tend to be engaged at the level as their client. So in other words, if the client isn't really engaged in managing the pest management program, I'll often see pest management professionals be a little less engaged themselves, take the path of least resistance, just not do everything that they should be doing to, have a robust program in place. So it's a two-way street, and, we need the food safety professional to take the pest management program really seriously and to be involved in it. You don't just hire a pest management company and say two things to them. You don't just say, number one, make sure we don't have pest problems. And number two, make sure we don't lose points on an audit. It's much more involved than that. It really is a partnership, and the food safety professional has to be involved, and there has to be just a solid give and take of observations by the pest management professional, corrective actions by the food safety professional, and when you have that going on a regular basis, you see incremental improvements throughout the facility. So, that's what I try to drive home when I do my trainings to pest management professionals and food safety professionals.
Yeah, that's super important. And it's always important to remember, right? The task being performed is only as good as the person performing it, right? So you have to be actively engaged with your pest management program. And if you have a good PCO who's going in your plants and checking on stuff and giving you feedback, and you're right, you're just not, hey, come in on third shift when nobody's around and leave the report on my desk. You're going to get exactly out of that what you put into it, right? Totally. So pest control, right, is an important activity. It's an important investment in your facility. Utilize it, right? Make sure that you understand what's going on in that facility. And if that relationship isn't working out, right, people are people. So you may have to make a change, right, and go with somebody else, because people are people, right? And you have superstars, and right, you have people who are maybe not so engaged on both sides of that equation. So everybody has to be engaged to make this correct. And I think that, with the change that SQF made in the pest system portion of the standard, right? It used to always be called pest control, right? Now it's called pest management, right? So getting more toward that proactive, you need to actively manage this process if you're going to be successful.
Totally agree. I find that because some of these global schemes like SQF and BRC are all based on risk, sometimes it's a little easier for the pest management company to score well during these audits versus some of the, older, GMP benchmark audits like the AIB audit or some of these other certification bodies with their GMP audits, where they had more very specific standard that had to be followed, right? And it wasn't anything of discretion, but rather this is what you need to do. So those were actually a little harder to comply with than these risk-based audits that we go through now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little easier for the PCO to score well on these audits. And sometimes that's a little misleading, by the way, what is actually going out on the floor.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Right. It kind of used to be in the past, right? Is that, if you were an auditor, going through the pest control book was an easy way to find some deviations at the plant. It's like, oh, your PCO license is expired by 3 days. I'm going to give you a minor on that. Okay, fine, right? So you would spend your time making sure that book is correct and all the information in there, but it's not really value added from that standpoint. So you got to make sure you're getting what you pay for.
Totally. And I think that, as technology continues to, progress, most pest management companies that are of any size now are doing all their documentation electronically. Mm-hmm. Many of them are still providing a paper logbook for an auditor to go through. And I hate that because it's too easy to find an outdated, pesticide label or SDS or a license, a certificate of insurance. Meanwhile, all of those things may be current, but somebody forgot to put it in a book. And it's not reflective of, a good program or not. It's somebody made a mistake and now you're going to lose points on it and we're going to be upset at the pest management provider. So now, we've got these portals where all of these documents are available to, clients and to auditors. And, I really think that that's the future. I think that a lot of people are still resisting it, but people need to get on board that train of electronic record keeping. And then the other bit of technology that is now been introduced into the industry are these smart devices, these smart traps. So instead of interior rodent control, devices or exterior bait stations, we now have these smart traps. These smart traps will send an alert when something goes inside the trap. So, typically a rodent. It could be a false alarm. That's happened. But as the technology has progressed, these newer iterations, there's less mistakes being made by the technology. And what it does is it allows that service professional to spend less time servicing devices and more time doing preventive type of value added tasks, and deep dive inspections, do some exclusion work, clean up a product spill, but you're able to provide just a better overall service. So if you don't mind, I'll just share with you and with the audience, when you look at a conventional pest management program, 80% of the time that the pest control operator is at the facility is spent servicing devices. I've been doing this for years, but it's only been about a year and a half that I look at that now and I'm like, that is absurd. 80% of our time is spent checking devices in which most cases don't have a rodent in them, but we keep doing it over and over again, week after week, or, twice a month, whatever it is, the frequency. We just keep doing it over and over again. And that's what we're paid to do. At the same time, I look at the investment from the food facility, 80% of their investment is for somebody to walk around and check a device and scan a barcode or punch a punch card or whatever. And it's it just doesn't make sense to me now. So these
Yeah.
smart devices, we refer to it in the industry as remote monitoring. These smart devices are definitely the future. And, I would say to any food facility, you need to explore that technology. You need to explore that technology because you're going to get better use of your investment by employing smart devices.
I had a funny thought here. If you want to develop this is yours. Is have a trap right on the outside of the building, and it's got that electronic remote monitoring capability, GPS, and all these type of things. And then if it detects that there's a mouse in that trap, right, it shuts the doors, and it's a drone, right, and it flies up and it goes over to the garbage can and drops it off, and then goes back to its spot.
All right, I'll get that over to NASA or Elon. Maybe I'll get over to Elon and we'll develop that. They'll do it faster than I could.
There you go. So, but you make an important point with the pest control operators, right? These are trained professionals who know a whole heck of a lot more about this field than you do in quality control, and utilize that. And one of the things, Hank, that I've always taught my quality managers in my plants is, and the visualization I use is this, right? You've got this stuff that's hitting you in the face every day, right? You've got lines that are down, you've got employee problems, somebody didn't show for a shift, right? All of those firefighting activities that you're doing every single day. And if you go home at the end of the night and say, shoo, right, all right, I had a good day at work, I'm tired, I'm going to bed, and you just keep repeating that cycle, things are never going to improve, right? You're just going to be caught on that treadmill, and you become frustrated, and you're going to quit, right, at some point. You're like, all right, I don't like this isn't fun. You have to kind of look through your fingers and look at that big picture and say, why are these things happening? So why is that important, right? This goes back to your point, right? I want the pest control operator, I don't want his face buried down in traps with the key and jiggling and trying to get in there and, where'd that trap go that was by the door, and tracking that down, right? They need to be looking around the facility just like the quality manager and say, hey, there's a lot of rafters in this area of this warehouse. I don't want birds to get in here. What are the potential vectors of what people can get? Okay, we have these dock doors. Hey, quality manager, you guys should probably put something in at this dock door. I noticed that this dry warehouse door is open quite a bit, right? That's a perfect way for pests to get in. Put in some way to mitigate that, put in a screen, close that door, whatever, but you need to think about this, right? That becomes a value-added service, right? And it becomes something that is preventative, to your point.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. In fact, the way I like to approach the pest management inspection is to look for those exact things that you're saying, right? Look for conditions that are conducive to pests, product spillage, ingress points into the facility, puddles in the parking lot, puddles on the roof, overgrown foliage outside the facility, product spillage outside the facility, poor employee practices inside the facility. I mean, there's so much to look for. And in the way I approach it is that all of that ties into the food safety, like self-inspection, right? So the facility has their own team doing self-inspections. The pest management provider should be, a supplement to that. They should be looking for the same exact things and provide that level of value. So yeah, looking for all those conducive conditions, the product spillage, pallets pushed up against perimeters, whatever it is, but also have a good awareness of food safety conditions that have nothing to do with pest management and be able to provide that extra added value to the food facility. Yeah. Look for exposed glass on the overhead light fixtures. Make sure, if there's no shatter shield on those devices or if they're not LEDs, look for missing slip sheets on pallets. Look for commingle allergens. Look for even more serious things like on overhead conveyors. Is there any dripping lubricant? And if there is, where is it dripping onto? Is it dripping onto a conveyor belt below? These things have nothing to do with pest management, but provide a great value and just kind of elevates the pest management professional into being, just a true partner in the overall food safety program.
That's a really good point, right? So one of the things that often happens, right, I'm sure you experience this too, is when you go and tour a facility or visit a facility you haven't been to maybe for a while, right? And you're kind of walking around and you're like, hey, what's that, right? and you'll see something that's not right. And then the quality manager, right, his eyes will get real big and go, right. I walk by that every day and I never noticed it, right? You're like, wow, you're really good at this. It's like, no, it's just that I'm a fresh set of eyes, right? I'm looking at things differently than you, right? As humans, we all think that when we're looking, we're seeing this, right? We're seeing everything when we look. No, we don't. In reality, our brain can only focus on certain little things at a time, right? It's why magic exists, right? Because the magician is really good at saying, look here, right? Where there's stuff going on over here. And then all of a sudden the coin comes up. You're like, oh, right? It's because of that focus, right? And utilizing that pest control operator to help you with those activities, right? They're a set of eyes you're paying for in that facility. Use them. Do a walkthrough, schedule a monthly walkthrough when they come through and say, okay, let's go through the facility. You can point out some of the things that you were talking about. Use that resource.
Yeah. And for the pest management professional, I mean, it really is just like a whole new paradigm for them, right? To spend 80% of their time servicing devices to now being expected. Now you're expected to really dig in with your inspection and be able to identify things. So for some pest management professionals, they may not be up to that challenge. And for others, I think what they're going to find is just a much greater reward in what they do day in and day out, that they're actually, hey, now I'm really supporting this facility's program. I'm a detective. I'm looking for things. I'm finding problems. I'm offering solutions. And, you go home at the end of the day with a much greater sense of, appreciation for what you do versus the individual who is going to spend, 3 of their 4 hours at a food facility servicing devices.
Yeah, you're part of the team now, right? You are going there and you are part of that team. You are helping them make better products.
Mm-hmm. No question.
Absolutely. So Joe had a question here. So how do we as an industry spread the word about how IPM must be value-added partners in our food safety management system? Good question.
So thank you for the question, Joe. I think that's been happening, although happening slowly. As I mentioned a little earlier, I think the introduction of, the GFSI audit schemes almost at the same time as the introduction of FSMA has kind of forced food facilities to have a greater appreciation for the pest management program. And like I said, I see facilities now investing into pest solutions where in the past they really didn't want to, or they just didn't. Some because they are now recognizing that it's the right thing to do. Others because they're scared not to. They feel like they're going to get into some regulatory problem if they don't. But I do feel like that's the trend that's happening in the food industry, is that food industry is recognizing more value in pest management. I think if we can really continue to advance pest management professionals towards using some of these smart devices that I was talking about, and then that whole paradigm shift into, hey, I'm a consultant, auditor, inspector, I'm providing value. I think that's just going to accelerate the respect for the pest management program even that much faster. So it's happening. It's happening slowly as technology continues to increase and be more widely accepted to the food industry. I think it'll accelerate that appreciation for the pest management program even more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're paying for the service, leverage it, use it. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of circle back around and kind of getting inside your brain relative to pest management. So within different industries, right? And this is a great way to get some feedback, guys, for your particular industry. So definitely put your comments in here. So generally we think of the food industry in different categories, right? So dairy and consumer packaged goods, beverage, meat, et cetera. So when you're thinking about these different industries, then does that then on the pest management side of things, does that then kind of fall into different categories of what type of organisms or what type of pests you're targeting within those areas and kind of your strategy? So I was kind of curious in those particular fields for the audience, then what are some of the key things they should be looking for that are unique to those particular product categories?
So that's a great question. And what I do say when I do training for pest management professionals is I say these words: if you want to be really good at providing pest management services to the food industry, you need to understand the food industry. And that means understanding the different risks that come along with different types of processors, as you was just saying, Bryan. So the risks that a bakery has versus the risks that a dairy producer has are very, very different, right? The risks that go along with a retail grocery store chain. I mean, it's just very different than what a beverage bottler might have as far as risk. So it really goes back to what I was saying earlier of that susceptibility exercise, understanding the different raw materials or food materials that are at that facility, and then assigning the risk so you know which pests you're at risk with. But let's go through some of it.
Yeah.
If you don't mind. If you were to say to me, well, what's one of the more challenging types of facilities for a pest management company or to design a pest management program around, I'll say to you, one of the most challenging are pet food manufacturers. Why? Because when we deal with stored product insects, we break them into two separate categories: internal feeders and external feeders. The internal feeders, which are insects like weevils or like a lesser grain borer, those are the internal feeders. They're found in whole grain, corn, rice, a whole kernel, right? Pet food manufacturers get those.
Yeah.
Separately, we deal with these external feeders, which are like Indian meal moths, cigarette beetles, warehouse beetles. You get those too in pet food manufacturing facilities. What else do you get in pet food manufacturing facilities? You have a product that's really attractive to rodents. You have a product that's really attractive to birds. You have a product that's really attractive to filth flies. So, I mean, I don't think there's a pest that we deal with in our industry that wouldn't like to be in a pet food manufacturing facility. So therein lies a great level of risk at a pet food manufacturing facility. A snack food manufacturer has a great level of risk as well, a little less than pet food. And then I would say, bakeries are right there. So are pasta manufacturing facilities, but then you get into, like, as you said, a dairy facility. What's my risk with dairy? It's not stored product insects. There's no stored product insects that have an interest in dairy.
Yeah.
Unless it's something like whole cheese. Whole cheese would attract maybe certain types of stored product insects, but very few are attracted to dairy. So the risk goes way down with stored product insects. But now we could say, okay, where is our dairy facility located? Is it located in an urban environment where now we're at risk with an insect like an American cockroach? What about cockroaches? Do we have a good culture here? Do our employees introduce cockroaches into our facility when they come into the facility because we don't have a good uniform service? Or that our employees are just bringing their own personal belongings onto the floor? Man, it's really complex, and there just has to be a good understanding of these things to, kind of thwart off the risk. But, I don't want to just keep going here, but absolutely, your question is a good one, is like, understand what we're producing, what we're storing, what we're selling, and then we can build the program around that, because based on those things, there's going to be certain risk.
That's wow. Yeah. So my mind, tons of questions around this area, right? So your point then too, right? So you have a plant, you have a product, you need to understand where that plant is located, right? To your point, if you have a dairy plant in rural Wisconsin, there's certain things you need to worry about that you may not need to worry about in a suburban area that you do need to worry about in those. Another point of it then too is the age of the facility, right? If you've got an old rickety plant with all kinds of holes in the walls and hollow areas and things that they can get in, and a lot of times in the food industry, companies grow and then they'll just add on to the original building, right? So we'll put this addition on here and this over here, and and you end up with this kind of hodgepodge of buildings. What's going on behind the scenes in the infrastructure for that building, right? What's the vectors then for these pests for moving around between those different locations, and how are they getting in? In older facilities, much more challenging, right? You don't have a lot of the mitigation things that we put in with new buildings now, right? So the rock perimeter around the building to help, discourage insects from boring down underneath, or rodents or what have you. So those type of things need to be looked into consideration too, right? So what I'm pulling out of that then really is, if you're looking at your pest management system in your plant, you should be doing a thorough assessment of all of these type of activities to make sure that program is tailored to what you need, right? It's not generic, right? It's just like food safety, right? You just can't take a generic food safety plan and say, okay, I'm good, right? I'm dairy and here's my food safety plan. No, everything is unique, and that's with pest control too.
Totally. You know, when I do an assessment, I just like to look at it from the different broad categories, and then try to find out where, what's the root cause of certain problems or where the risks really are, right? So we'll look at the building. We'll look at the maintenance of the building. That's the category, right? Maintenance for food safety. We'll look at the condition of the facility. We'll look at the condition of the equipment. We'll look at the, preventative maintenance program that exists. Then we'll separately look at the sanitation program. We'll look at the sanitation of the facility. We'll look at the employee practices, which is where we find so many problems, to be honest with you. I mean, we're talking about the two-legged human makes mistakes, right? Many times it revolves around just not having a great food safety culture at a facility. But, when you have a workforce that doesn't have respect for the facility or doesn't have respect for food safety, these are the facilities where we find most of the problems.
Right.
They don't treat it like a food facility. They treat it like just a manufacturing site. And that's a whole cultural issue that has to be addressed.
That's a good point. Yeah. Because, I mean, so we talk a lot now about food safety culture, and this is an important aspect of that.
It is. That's probably the most important thing, I would say, is the culture at the facility, right? And a lot of facilities, they've had, staff there for many years, and all of a sudden, because they're co-packaging, they're asked to go through an audit, right? Or they're asked to, transition their audit from, a GMP or GDP audit to a GFSI audit. And it becomes like this whole cultural shift that needs to occur. And if you don't have really good buy-in from ownership and management for some of the smaller facilities, you're not going to get the staff on board, and you're not going to be able to progress that facility in the right direction, or certainly not as quickly as you'd like. Yeah. It really comes down to just a whole cultural buy-in of a food safety culture. And it starts with ownership or upper level management and goes from there.
Yep. You got to walk the talk. I mean, so part of, I think too, is something that quality managers and the management team and the plant should think about in this aspect as well, is when you're going through changes in your facility, right? We talk about this in our food safety plans, right? Okay, if things change, you need to update your food safety plan. Well, if things change in your plant too, you need to update your pest control management program. So let's say that the facility, like we were talking about before, is expanding, right? Oh, we're going to build this on, right? Well, now you're disturbing everything, right? Which means you're disturbing the flora, the pests and things like that in that area as well. So how is that going to impact, right? So now you've got contractors coming and going, and maybe there's a giant plastic sheet blocking off one area in the plant where they're doing all their work. Involve the pest control company in that. Say, hey, listen, we've got this big construction project coming up. We need you to pay special attention to make sure we're not disturbing stuff and making this worse than it should be. So let's put together a plan around that.
I can't tell you, Bryan, how many times in my career I've dealt with food facilities that had no rodent problems at all. They do an expansion program and they're cutting open a wall. And to your point, they're dropping plastic down during working hours. They're bringing people in and out. And although they may do their best and what they think is their best to just cordon off that area from active areas that are still producing product or packaging product, mice get in. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that in my career. In fact, I was at a pharmaceutical facility a few months back doing an IPM audit for them. And I mean, when you talk about zero tolerance for pests, that is the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, right? That I do a lot of work with them. Their biggest risk, by the way, are just miscellaneous invaders. They don't even deal with stored product insects the way that the food producers do. But this facility, I mean, they couldn't fathom having a rodent in their facility. They have zero tolerance for it. But they were doing an expansion product. And when I went into the area where they were doing the construction, I found, I think, 7 dead mice in mechanical devices that were left by the pest management company that were no longer servicing those devices because they decided it was too much of a safety risk to have the pest management company go into the area where the construction was going on. But the devices were still in there. I went in there, found about 7 dead, decomposed mice. And man, this facility was like, I can't believe this is happening. But this is what happens when you cut a big hole open in the wall. I mean, and now you have risk. Now you have risk to actual production areas in the facility. But I've seen mouse problems get out of control really quick. I mean, the reproductive capacity of mice is pretty impressive, you know, and within a couple of months' time, you can have something that you didn't even know was a problem become an infestation.
Yeah, so I kind of the saying, I'm kind of curious if you agree with us. In the food industry, I've always heard is right. So for every rodent you see, there's probably at least 10 more you don't.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know. I'm not answering that one because I've never done any, never seen any real studies around that. But here's the deal with mice. They are nocturnal. They have, incredible reproductive capacity, and they have an alpha male in the colony that will, reproduce or sire with all the females. It's kind of nature's way of the strong surviving. So the strongest male, the alpha male, he does all the reproduction. So when you see mice during the daytime, it's a good indicator that you have a pretty well-established population, and it's all those, weaker mice, the B-level mice that are now forced to forage during the daytime because at night it's the alpha male and the females that are running the show. So when you see mice during the daytime, it's a pretty good indicator of a pretty well-established infestation at that point.
Wow, that's really interesting. That's a key piece of information, guys. So make sure and write that down. Another question here from Joe. Thank you, Joe. Are pest control firms doing enough to train their associates to be savvy enough to know what pests are inherent in what types of operations? I see it every day, and this is not always the case.
No, the answer is no to that. I don't think that the pest management industry as a whole, so I'm going to talk about the industry. I'm not going to talk about any individual companies, but as a whole, they're not good. They're not good at stored product insects in particular, right? It's just the most complex of understanding insects in a food facility. So there's a huge lack of understanding of the internal feeders, the external feeders, where to put pheromone monitoring devices, etc. Some companies are very good at it. Other companies don't have a clue where to begin. It's everything's just like kind of this cookie cutter IPM program. And like I said at the beginning of our program today, it all revolves around knowing the insect, right? Knowing the insect and knowing which products are at risk. But to answer Joe's question, no, the industry is not good at it.
Right. So my piece of advice on this, and this is, have I done this? No, I haven't. I should. So one of the pieces of advice I give, Hank, on the food safety side of things is if you're doing like a food safety audit, right? So you've got a third-party auditor coming in, things like that. Part of my advice is to interview the potential auditors that certification body wants to send into your plant. How do they approach auditing? How do they look at majors and minors in the plant? What's their demeanor? How do they interpret the code? These type of things. You should be doing that with your PCO as well, right? Talk with the company and say, hey, who are you going to be sending to my facility? Oh, we got Billy Bob here who's coming to your facility. Okay, great. I would like to talk with him. I want to understand how he approaches pest management, right? And that's going to give you a good idea of that person who's coming to your facility, if they're going to be a good partner for you or not, right? Because this is your money. You're spending a lot. You need to make sure that you're getting value out of that. So there's nothing, you need to do that, right? You need to be proactive in making sure you have a good partner.
I got to tell you, I think that's a great idea. I don't even know if a lot of companies know whether they can do that or not, right? They don't even think about doing that sort of thing. But, if you're a facility and you're a bakery, right? Maybe you make cookies and muffins and sweet baked goods. You should know the background of the auditor that's coming into your facility. Do they come out of the baking industry? Do they understand the nuances of baking and the different pieces of equipment that you're going to have at your facility, right? There's definitely value in knowing the background of the person who is your auditor. Were they just a corporate auditor for some other food manufacturer that didn't really deal with your particular, industry or your sector of the food industry? I mean, so I see great value in that, to be honest with you. I would never think of telling my clients to interview the auditor. I would just, we would just say, hey, here's your options for different certification bodies that we think do a good job.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, auditors and pest control operators, and we're all people, right? And we all have unique ways of approaching things, right? So if I'm a quality manager in a plant and I'm looking at bringing in a new pest control operator into my facility, I'm going to be saying things like that. It's like, hey, we're looking at moving to your company and we produce baked goods in our facility. What are some of the things you're going to zero in on when you come to my plant? Oh, well, all right. And then they can kind of go through that list. I always kind of break down. I mean, knowledge breaks down into two areas, right? There's kind of the theoretical and the applied, right? We all know super smart people who understand things at a high level, but don't understand the actual application of that information, right? And that real world knowledge of, okay, I'm in a plant and I'm dealing with real world issues that need to be solved right now. That's a very, very valuable skill. When you find people who can do that well, man, hold on to those people. And that applies to this field too.
Well, that's a great tip. That to interview the auditor. Love that.
Yeah. Oh, you bet. So let's see. So trends, we talked a little bit about trends, right? With these smart traps and these types of things, which sounds super cool. Any other things you're seeing out there on the horizon?
Man, I really love this, the remote monitoring, the smart devices. I think that's the newest introduction to the industry that's going to continue to grow. You look at the industry, and it was an industry that was predicated on the application of pesticides many years ago, and really has progressed into, integrated pest management. And, with that, and with increased, regulations and challenges for some of these chemical manufacturers to get new pesticides to market, we don't see many anymore. So we used to, as an industry, look and say, hey, what are the new pesticides that we want to, consider using? Now we don't do that anymore. Now we say, what are the new technologies that we can look at to use? So to answer your question, the smart devices are definitely one of the things that are the most exciting for the industry. The other things are just some of these customized reports that we're now doing. So doing just like automated push reporting, preventive control summary reports, critical alerts, so for example, alerts that go out to our clients that say, hey, we observed a condition at your facility 30 days ago, and it still hasn't been resolved. And now a push report automatically goes out to a senior manager so that they could say, hey, how come this hasn't been resolved? And it just kind of like opens up communication between the facility management hierarchy as well as our organization. And it's just an efficient way to get information out to people. So some of this push reporting, that's customized push reporting that we're able to do, is of great value. That and these remote monitoring devices.
That's a really good point, because part of this too, right, is again, and I like how you emphasize that this is a two-way street, right? Because if you've got a very diligent pest control operator out there who's finding stuff and reviewing the plant and really looking at stuff, creating amazing value and information for the quality manager who's managing, or whoever's managing that program at the plant, and they don't do anything with it, what's the point, right? It's a partnership. You have to work together to make sure that you're improving the facility.
Yeah, listen, a lot of it's driven by the client. The client will come to us and say, hey, here, I'm a corporate food safety guy. I've got, a bunch of processing facilities and distribution centers that I'm responsible for. I need dashboard push notifications of what's going on in the field so I can be aware, and they'll tell us exactly what they want. And then we've got a great team that just does all sorts of really cool, customized report writing. And we just set it up and we do just push reports that go out to the client and go out to our managers so that they're seeing the same thing, keeps everybody aligned, and just makes for better communication and a better response time to conditions and the program itself.
Yeah. One of the things that I would always tell my quality managers is that, there's a really unfortunate side effect of what we do, in that if you're really good at it, nobody notices, right? Because everything's going great, right? You're making great product. There's no food safety issues. It's just chugging along. And people who aren't in that discipline think that just automatically happens, and that is not the case. And pest control is the same way, right? If you're doing an awesome job, there's no problems, right? Everybody goes, oh, this is great, right? The flip side of that, right, is when things get out of control and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we have a recall or something like this. It's the same with pest control, right? If you're calling up Hank's company and saying, oh my God, we've got this giant infestation, come in and fix it right now. Number one, right, you're going to pay a lot of money to get that back to where it should. And number two is, why did you let it get to that way in the first place, right? You had a problem, right? Don't wait, right? You'll hear this a lot with recalls is, oh my God, why did this happen to us? Well, yeah, right. Little things add up over time. And you may not think you have a problem, and then all of a sudden you do, right? And back to our original point, you got the employee in the plant who's been tolerating this forever and finally says, okay, enough's enough. I'm posting a video online. And then you wake up, right? Don't get to that point.
Oh, I totally agree with you. That all goes to the culture, right? That goes to the food safety culture at the facility. And, if you're letting a pest problem get out of control, there's something very wrong with the food safety culture at that facility, that nobody escalated that problem to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so part of this, again, back to my two-way street point, is if you're the quality manager in the facility, reach out to your pest control company and arrange training, right? You need to understand what the PCO understands so that you can speak the same language. So bring them in and say, okay, hey guys, we're doing a presentation on pest management in your plant. Here's the things I'm worried about. Okay, you're a bakery, right? So here's the things that I'm worried about in your plant, blah, blah, blah. Here's a picture of a weevil, right? If you see this little dude running around, let me know, right? Expand, multiply the eyes of the pest control company so that it's just not him running around looking for this stuff. You've got your entire team looking for this stuff as well.
I agree. Listen, when it comes to staff training at a food facility, pest management just doesn't get done enough. It just doesn't. I was doing some training for a food facility a couple of years back, and we wanted to do it in two parts. One was classroom style training, and then the other part of the training was on the floor, bakery. And when it was time to go out on the floor, one of the things that I wanted to do was, hey, let's go do a sifter tailing check for your bulk flour. Ooh. Well, the sifter screen, the hand screen, was torn up so badly that they can't sift. They couldn't even sift. I said, first of all, they couldn't find it. I said, where's your sifter screen? And they couldn't find it. They finally found it. It was in the maintenance shop. It was torn up. And I said, somebody show me how to do that. They didn't know how. Wow. But yet they had a log that somebody was signing off on for each shift that they were doing sifter tailing checks.
Ooh, pencil whipping.
Separately, I got brought into a fortune cookie factory that had flour beetles everywhere. So once you have flour beetles beyond the bulk system itself, that means you've had blowouts, you have infestation in the bulk system, but you've had blowouts that flour's now getting airborne, and now you have flour beetles air in different areas. So I understand it. I know the source is the bulk system. And I said the source. So I told them that. They said, no. We don't have flour beetles in our bulk system. So I said, I'm going to come down there. Let's do a sifter tailing check. We did. And as we're doing the sifter tailing check with the hand screen, we're finding flour beetle larvae on the screen. And I'm showing them that. So the point was, they didn't know what to look for.
Right.
It wasn't that they weren't checking the screen. In this case, they didn't know what to look for.
Huge point. Huge point. That's a perfect way to end our conversation. So let's kind of bring it back up to the 30,000 foot level. So fascinating conversation, Hank. Thank you. What kind of key takeaways would you like to leave with the audience today?
I guess for the food safety professionals, you have a huge role in the pest management program, right? You really do. And you have to manage the pest management program, which means you have to understand all of the responsibilities of the pest management service provider, and you need to engage with them and you need to hold them accountable. And you will get out of your pest management program what you put into it.
Yeah.
If you don't engage with the service professional, you're likely to have somebody who's just not going to be delivering the level of service that you'd like.
Perfect summary. I love it. So if people want to get a hold of you, Hank, your email's on the screen there, but it's a little cut off. What's the rest of that there at the end?
Oh, so it's Hirsch at rkenvironmental.com.
Perfect. Perfect. And I also have a platform, Locals, and I'll put the link in here for everybody. I'm running a promotion right now. Locals is a free platform that we talk about this stuff, right? So you can go here and talk about pest control in your facility and continue this conversation, because I love the comments from Marcel here. Thank you very much. I'm glad you got a ton of value out of it. This is why we do this, right? Is to help spread this information, because we all improve together, right? There's no reason for us to hoard this information, right? We all benefit from this, and we're all consumers, right? If I'm eating fortune cookies, I want to know that that fortune cookie is taken care of and that that company is making those correctly. So on the Locals link, you can use this promo code that I've got there, and you get a free month on the membership side. And I post additional stuff there, videos, worksheets, other things that I've developed in my career to help you along as well. So great summary, and really enjoyed this one. And I'm always amazed, Hank, how quickly the time goes on these. It's just like, man, we could talk for another hour easily. But thank you, everyone, for joining us this week. Hopefully you got as much value out of this as I have. And join us next week at the same time. So Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain, 10 a.m. Eastern, and we'll do the next food safety chat. And wow, this has been great. Everybody have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, Hank. Really enjoyed this. And thank you to everybody to investing the time in this and learning about this important field. So have a great weekend. Enjoy yourself. I know I'm going to. Hopefully we got some beautiful fall foliage out here. I haven't been up to the mountains yet. I got to go up and see that. So hopefully get out and have some fun. So have a great weekend, Hank.
You too, Bryan. Thanks for inviting me.
You bet. Thanks, everyone.